My name is Aubrey, and I am Miami Church.
Mi nombre es George Santana.
I am Ajay Williams.
Mi nombre es María.
I'm Paul.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Allegra.
Mi nombre es Mark Herrera.
My name is Haley, and I am Miami Church.
Et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Will, and I'm Miami Church.
Nama saya Carmen. Saya adalah Miami Church.
My name is Kevin Sparrow, and I am Miami Church.
Je m'appelle Arnaud et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Carolina and I'm Miami Church.
Meu nome é Hudson e eu sou Miami Church.
My name is Crystal Guico, and I am Miami Church.
Yo soy Miami Church.
We are Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
What I love about that bumper video is this picture of the church, right? Literally people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different faith beliefs, but this idea that we come together, right? And we form this one church, under the idea that there's this good God who loves us and we can do life together. And it's literally people from all the world, different backgrounds. There's even a Florida State fan in there, which if God can love someone that's a Florida State fan, he can love every single person, all right? So yeah, yes. But I was thinking about this. There's a family I know here that I've known for several years that live locally here. And if I were to bring them up here, I wouldn't do that because I'd embarrass them. But if I were to bring them up here and they were you would look at them and they would look very normal to you. In fact, they're a dynamic people. They're super nice, have great personalities. And if you were to see them, you were wow, they just have it all together. There's a husband and wife, and they have several kids, and they're really involved in school activities and after-school activities, and they're very social, and they're nice friends, nice people, and they have all these friends or really acquaintances. But here's what I know about them, because I've got to know them really well over the past few years, is if they ever slow down, which they don't do very often because life just goes really fast, and there's always somewhere to be, and there's always a bill to pay, or always something to do. But if they were really able to actually slow down for just a minute, and they were actually able to peel it back a little bit and to just be honest, what they would say is they would say that we're lonely, that we feel isolated, that we're alone. And they would say, we got a lot of activities and we're here and there and we're doing this and we got it all. But truthfully, if we really hit a crisis in our family, if it really became a tough spot in our family, who would we call? Like when it hit the fan, who would be the person, who would be the family that we would call? Who would it be? Again, on the outside, they look like they have it all together, and they look like they're busy and they're active and they got all this, and their social feed looks really good. But who is it that we would call? And they would even take it a step further, who actually knows me? I mean, not just knows, where I live or where I work or what I do, but who knows me? Knows my longings, my heart's desires, knows about me, knows what I really want, knows my pains and my hurts. Who really knows me? You ever feel alone? I mean, you're around people and busy and active and social, but do you ever just feel alone or isolated? Who would you call? Right? If it really got desperate, who would you call? Who would it be? You think, well, how can this be? Lonely, isolated, disconnected? I mean, we live in a major city. There's millions of people. I mean, literally out this window is one of the busiest stretches of roadway in the United States of America. Metro Rail goes by. There's millions of people. You go to school with people. You work with people. There's people all around. One author said it this way. He says, you can be surrounded by people but still experience what he called crowded loneliness. This idea that you're surrounded by people, you're surrounded by business, you're surrounded by things, but yet in the midst of that, you feel lonely. You feel isolated. And it's not because there's no one around, but it's a sense of crowded loneliness. And here's the reality. We're the most connected that we've ever been as a culture, yet more people feel alone. And the more that I've studied this, the more that I've researched this, there's tons of studies on this. One recent one that I read, it said this. It said that 47% of people self-identified as feeling left out. Almost every study that I read it is at least about half the people say they feel alone or isolated. Here's some other things. 46% self-identify as they sometimes or always feel alone. 43% say that they feel that their relationships aren't meaningful. Like, yeah, we're friends on Instagram, and yeah, we hang out, or we know, but it's not like deep. We don't really know. 43% say that they feel isolated from others. 27% say they rarely or never feel they are with people who really understand them, who really know them. 20% say they rarely or never feel close to people. And here's the saddest one. 18% of people said that they have people they can talk to. Makes me sad to think that only 18% of people in these studies that say that there's actually somebody that I can talk to, like really share my heart and my life with. You know, many experts in that study this are saying that we have hit a place where loneliness is a cultural epidemic, that loneliness is being considered now a hazard to human health comparable to obesity and smoking. In fact, I mean, we all, if we're honest, right, we all have feelings. There's always a sense that sometimes we have a feeling of being isolated or alone. But persistent loneliness, continual loneliness, can be a problem that it actually damages your physical health and it shortens your life. In fact, one expert says this. He says that persistent loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That if you really isolate yourself and you're lonely, it's the equivalent on your body, it's the equivalent on your health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And here's what's interesting about this is the more that I've studied this, and this at first I was like, this can't be, and I dug deeper and it actually is true, is that societies or age groups who have higher social media interaction actually experience more loneliness. Like the studies say that generations like millennials, Gen Y, or Gen Z are actually the loneliest generations. The conclusion of the study was the younger you are, the more lonely you feel. But this is not how we were created. I mean, we weren't created to be isolated or alone. We were created to know and to be known. We were created to love and to be loved. And maybe you're just sitting there, well, Greg, this just seems like a technology problem. It seems like everything was good, and then we had the iPhone, and then now we got all these, Facebook came along, and then Twitter, and there's Instagram, and then there'll be something else next week. It seems like there's a technology problem. And I do think technology is an issue. We've all experienced that. But it's not just a technology problem. It's a human problem. And what technology does, it puts a magnifying glass on it, and it reveals what's there. It magnifies and it amplifies what is there. This is a human condition, a human problem that we all face. And I believe there's this devious disconnection that's underway in our culture, and it's not just a tech problem, it's a human problem. And there's something inside of me, right? There's a default inside of me that chooses isolation. And the problem with it, it's literally killing us. Like literally, physically killing us. Physically and mental. Our physical health, our mental health. There's a rise in stress and anxiety disorders. Because we weren't created to be this way. We weren't created to live in isolation. This is not what God intended. This was not our divine design. Crowded loneliness. I'm around a lot of people, but yet I feel isolated. I feel alone, and there's no one I can share with and can be open with and share my heart's longings and desires. There's another type of loneliness that I experience, and I meet a lot of people. Talk to a lot of people, and maybe you've heard this or maybe you said this. I'll meet a lot of people who say they're Christians, right? I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus. And they'll say something like this to me, right? Have you ever heard this? They'll say, I love Jesus, I'm into Jesus, but I just don't like church, right? I'm into Jesus, but the organized religion thing, I can't do that. And so I'll pray, and I can read the Bible, and I can listen to a podcast. And I'm good, right? Me and Jesus, me and God, we're good. But I just can't get into the church thing. You ever heard this? You heard someone say that? Yeah, I've heard it a lot. In fact, we talked a little bit about that last week in part 1 of what All In, and this idea that a lot of this comes around this misunderstanding of what actual church is. And you can actually listen to the podcast on that. Did you get what I just did there? Gotcha. Yeah. But there's this misunderstanding, right? And I get it, right? I get it because I actually grew up in a church, right? I actually grew up in an environment, right, that had what I call, we didn't call it this, but it had what I call a vertical orientation, right? This idea that following Jesus, following God, it's this vertical orientation, or this vertical oriented faith, right? And no one explicitly said this, but this is just what happened. And what this means is there's this vertical faith, right? It's me and God. God's there, I'm here. And it's all about this relationship, this personal relationship between me and God. And this type of orientation tends to focus on a couple things. There's more than this, but primarily there are two things. The first thing focuses on morality. The idea is like, hey, you just behave, you do the right things, don't do the wrong things, do the right things, and as long as you behave, as long as you're good and a good person, then you and God are good, right? And then the second thing that this type of orientation tends to focus on is you just need to give. You just need to be generous, and you need to give, and you need to give a tithe, which a tithe is like the first 10% of everything you make. You need to give that. And so the idea here, again, they don't say this quite this straightforward, but if I'm moral and I behave and I do the right things and I don't go to the wrong places or hang out with the wrong people, and I give and I'm generous, right? If I do those things, then I'm good. And me and God are good and everything's good, and that's okay. Now, the challenge with this is that type of teaching, that type of belief turns very quickly into self-righteousness and judgmentalism and isolation. And the reality is the more that I have studied, the more that I've studied the first church and the New Testament, the more that I have experienced personally in my life as I get older, the more my now going on multiple decades of being a pastor, of working with people, the more that I work with people, the more that I see that that's just not a complete picture of the gospel. It's not a complete picture of what it means to follow Jesus. Vertical, yes, there is this idea of a relationship with God and a personal relationship with God, but it doesn't give us the full picture. And here's why, right? You can go to the research. You can go to research that's not based on anything around the idea of faith or God or Jesus or church. You can go to the research, and it clearly says that loneliness and isolation is destructive for you. If you are lonely and isolated, over time, it will literally kill you. Like it will literally crush you physically, mentally, emotionally. It will crush you. It's also why those people who I know who have tried to do the solo Christian thing, the I'm on my own, I'm good, me and the podcast and the Bible and prayer, we're good. It's why every single person I know that has done that over a long season of time has ultimately fallen away from faith. Well, why? It's because that's not how we were created. See, we were hardwired deep within us, deep inside of us. We were hardwired for community. We were divinely designed to need other people, to need each other, to need to do life, not as an individual, but as a team sport. I remember there was a time in my 20s when I just kind of got put off a little bit by some of the things that were going on in the church, and like, okay, really? I'm kind of over this. And so I swung over kind of to this side, to the solo Christian side. And like, I'm good. I can read my Bible. I can do this thing. Me and God, we're good, vertical, right? We're good. But now as I look back, right, with perspective, I can go, you know what? That was a season in my life where I was isolated. That was a season in my life where I made some of the worst decisions that I have made. And that was a season in my life that was a lowest point in my life. Right? He's like, you can't do it. You know, it's real simple, right? If Jesus were like literally standing here, he said the same thing to all of us, right? He kind of has this like, what does he say to you? And he says this simple thing. And this is true of all of us. I know in this room, again, I know a lot of you in this room, we're coming from all kinds of backgrounds, right? I mean, some of you are just kind of checking out this whole church thing, this Jesus thing, and you're like, I'm just not sure. Some of you have been burned. You know, you've had church experiences in your past and you've been burned and you're like, I don't know. Maybe you're trying it back out. Some of you are like George, you know, you grew up Catholic and you had this concept of God, but it was always God over there and me over here. And there's some of you who've been walking with God for years and decades. So we're all on this, wherever you are on this, like continuum, this spectrum, right? This faith journey. The same thing. Jesus would say the same thing to you that he would say to everybody else. He says it. He simply says, hey, follow me. Like, follow him. If you're at the front end, he's just saying, hey, I love you. I want to be in a relationship with you. Follow me. If you've been walking with him for years, maybe there's something else. He's saying, hey, follow me. And you got to follow into deeper levels of faith and belief. But where he is, he's just saying, hey, follow me. Just follow me. But here's the thing. You can't fully follow Jesus by yourself. You can't fully follow Jesus alone in an isolation. In fact, there was a guy, and many of you know this, there was a guy named Paul. And Paul, if you study his story in the first century, he's this guy that was killing the Christians and persecuting the church. And Acts chapter 9, he has this encounter with Jesus, and boom, he becomes a follower of Jesus. He starts all these churches, kind of like this church, and he helps start them. And then he would travel, and he would write these letters back to the churches with instructions. He'd say, hey, I'm going to give you instructions on what it's like to follow Jesus, right? Follow me. What is it like to follow Jesus? And if you read through all of these letters that he wrote, over 50 times he says one another, right? And you see on the screen, I call it the one another list. Like, this is just a selection of them. There's more than this. But he writes, he says, hey, if you want to follow Jesus, then you got to one another. And he says things like this. You see him there. He says, forgive one another, accept one another, care for one another, encourage one another, submit to one another, restore one another, carry one another's burdens, bear, right? And the idea is, again, there's over 50, that you're to one another. He says to really be a follower of Jesus, right, is you got to forgive, and you got to accept, and you got to care, and you got to show compassion and grace and be patient. You got to do all these things. And guess what? You can't one another yourself, right? You can't one another in isolation. You one another in community together. And so what I have discovered as I have been on this journey is, yes, there is this idea of a vertical relationship with God, right? There's this idea of a personal relationship, you and God. That is absolutely true. But I think sometimes we swung it so far where it's just that. There's also this idea of horizontal, of others, of community together. It's really a both and. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And I believe both and gives us the full picture of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Now think about this, for example. This is baptism. George up here talked about baptism a minute ago, and we're doing this baptism celebration, right? Now, I say the word baptism, and all of a sudden it's like these little, what do you call those little bubble things that popped up all over your heads? I just see them, boop, 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 boop. And there's like 45 different things that just popped up, right? It's like, whoa. You know why baptism is so confusing? Like I say baptism, and you've got this image of baptism. You know what's so confusing? Because for years, for centuries, the church has changed or added to the simple idea of baptism, right? I mean, if you just study the teachings of Jesus, it's really simple. But then you meet people and they start talking about baptism, and it's like this voodoo stuff, and you're like, what? Where did you get that? Well, some tradition somewhere, right? But the simple idea, right? If you just really look at the simple idea is that Jesus teaches that hey, I love you and I want to be in a relationship with you, and I came and died for you, and I want you to give your life to me. Like, it's a simple idea that you're controlling your life, right? Like you have the keys, right? And you're driving your life. And most of us, if we drive our life too long, we end up in the ditch, right? Or we end up in the swamp somewhere, right? And Jesus says, hey, if you try to drive your own life, it's going to be disastrous. Why don't you give me the keys to your life, right? And so there's this place of like giving your life to Jesus, right? Following, like, okay, I'm going to follow you and give you the control of my life, right? And you become in this relationship with God, right? So that's a vertical kind of orientation. But then Jesus says, hey, once you become a follower, once you give me the control of your life, once you give me the keys to your life, the first step, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to be baptized, right? Now, can we just slow down and back up here a minute? Okay, you saw that picture earlier. Is that weird, right? That you go into the water, right? You walk out into the, well, here we do it in the ocean, right? You go, it can be any water. You go into the water, and every picture of baptism in the New Testament is this idea of immersion or going under the water, right? Right? Is that, I mean, okay, so time out. Am I the only one that thinks this is weird? I think it's weird. Because I just want to go like, time out, Jesus. Hold up now. Okay. So I get the following you, and I met thousands of people whose lives are in the ditch. They give you control. I get that. But the first thing, like the first step of following Jesus is baptism, and I'm going to like walk people in the water, and we're going to be like, when you come up, like, really? Like, why? Why would that be the first step? Right, but it's like this idea, like, okay, well, first of all, right, you can't do it on your own. Like, you could just over here, like me and Jesus, we're good. We're good, right? I'm going to give you my life, Jesus. Like, I could do that and never tell anybody, right? I could be like a secret Christian, closet Christian, and I could be like, ooh, no, yeah, right? Right? You met these people, right? But what does baptism force you to do? Right? It forces you to go public. It forces you to say, hey, yes, something happened inside of me. Something happened in my heart. Something happened where I gave the keys over to God to control my life. But going public, baptism is this idea of going public. It's the idea of standing before church. It's the idea of standing out on the beach in front of hundreds of people and going, hey, I'm in. I gave my life to Jesus, and I'm going public. Right? And it's like God's just saying, hey, this simple idea of baptism, yeah, there's this vertical idea of you and God. It's you and God is a relationship with you. But there's also this idea, it's not just about you. And one of the first things I want you to do is I want you to go public. I want you to lock arms with other people who are part of the church, and I want you to go. That's why baptism is a big deal for us. That's why we have these baptism celebrations. Right? It's because we're celebrating what's happening inside of someone, right? And we're celebrating it publicly. Because this idea of there's a vertical dimension, but there's also a horizontal dimension. That one of the letters that was written to the first church, it's actually a long sermon, but it's like a letter, is what we call now the book of Hebrews, and it's actually in the New Testament, the second part of And the author of Hebrews, if you really read it and study it, he's going to go back and forth between a vertical orientation and a horizontal orientation. And I want to just show you this real quick. This is kind of a both and idea. Hebrews chapter 10. It'll be on the screens here. Hebrews 10. Now again, he's writing. Like, look what he says, verse 19. Brothers and sisters. Okay, he's writing to the church. Okay, that's a way of saying, hey, men and women, students, those of you who are followers of Jesus. Look what he says. Okay, we are not afraid to enter the most holy room. We enter boldly because of the blood of Jesus. Now, if you're new to the church, new to the Bible, I just lost you right there. You're like, what is he talking about? What holy room? What are we talking now? Again, he was writing this to the first century church. He was writing this to Jewish followers of Jesus. When he said this, they immediately knew what he was talking about, right? Now we have to study a little bit and see. But the reality is he's writing to these Jewish Christians, and they all knew, right, that in Jerusalem there was a temple. And the temple was the place of worship. If you wanted to go and worship God, if you wanted to go where the presence of God was, you had to leave wherever you lived and go to the temple in Jerusalem. And there was this temple, and inside this temple, right, there was actually two rooms. There was this outer room, and then there was this back room, and the back room was called the Holy of Holies. It was the holy place. And it was their belief, right, that God's presence resided in this room. And there was this curtain that separated. And there was all of these rules about this holy place, and it's really crazy. And really only the high priest could go into the holy place, and he could only go one time a year. And not only that, it was so crazy about this, that the high priest, when he would go into this room, is they would actually put bells on his clothes, and they would actually tie a rope around his ankle. Because the idea was if this guy goes in there and he screws up and doesn't do something exactly down the rules, then he's going to fall over dead, and I can't go in there and get him. So I'll be listening like, did the bell stop? What if he stopped? And then we're going to pull this joker out of there, right? Right? That was kind of the idea, right? But what he's saying now is, hey, when Jesus died, right, when Jesus was on the cross, and some of you may know this, when he was on the cross, the moment he said, I give it up, I give up my life, Matthew tells us that the curtain in the temple torn from where? From the top to the bottom. And it was like Jesus said, hey, something's new here. This is not a continuation of something old. This is something new. You now, right, you don't need a high priest. You don't need a one-time-a-year thing. You don't even need a temple. You now, as followers of Jesus, you now can be in a relationship with God. You have direct access to God. You don't need anybody or anything. You can be in a relationship with God. He's saying, so now you enter the most holy place, and you can do it boldly because of what Jesus did. It makes sense? That's what he's writing. We'll keep going. Verse 20. His way is new, because he lives. And that's important, right? This is not a continuation of something that happened. This is a new thing that happened. You can be in this relationship with God. And it has been opened to us through the curtain. There's the language, the curtain that was torn. And I'm talking about his body. He's saying, hey, you have direct access. You don't need a temple. You don't need a priest. Verse 21. We also have a great priest over the house of God. And this great priest now he's talking about is Jesus. There's no longer this temple system. Now we're talking about Jesus. Verse 22, look what he says. So let us, that's you. So let us do what? Come near to God with a sincere heart. Let us, that's you. What's he say? Let us come near boldly because of our faith. Our hearts have been sprinkled, our minds have been cleansed from a sense of guilt, our bodies have been washed with pure water. Now, here's what he's talking about here. He says, let us come near. Let us draw near. This is a very vertical orientation, right? This is the idea that you, that me, just how you are, you don't have to get your life in order. You don't have to do anything else. He's saying, hey, you can come near to God. You can draw near to God. There's this idea that God is pursuing you. In fact, I would say it's a relentless pursuit of you. I've had enough conversations, enough coffees, enough lunches to know that God is at work and he's pursuing you. He's after you. He wants your heart. He wants you and he's pursuing you. And if you slow down long enough to look, you probably can see this. He longs to be in a relationship with you and he says, hey, draw near. In fact, his brother James said it this way in James chapter 4. He says, draw near to God and God will draw near to you. Come near to God and God will, like, well, where's God, man? I don't know. I haven't seen him. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And so what he's saying here, the writer of Hebrews, he's saying, hey, yes, God is pursuing you. He wants to be in a relationship with you. He died for you. He rose for you. He loves you. He's doing everything he can to be in a loving relationship with you. And so come near, draw near. He'll reveal himself. And some of you today, that's what you need to do. You've been hanging back. You've been holding back. And there's this sense of like, okay, man, God, I'm ready. I got to give you the keys. I got to give you control. But then he makes this pivot. Look what he says, the writer of Hebrews 23. But let us hold firmly to the hope we claim we have. The God who promised is faithful. And he's going to make this pivot from this come near to God. You can be in a relationship with God. God is pursuing you. He's going to say, but hey, but there's more. The full picture, the complete picture is this, 24. Let us consider, let us explore, let us contemplate how we can stir up one another. There's the one another again. How we can encourage, how we can spur is another version. How we can spur, how we can encourage, how we can stir up one another to what? To love. And let us help one another to do good works. And he's saying here like, yes, you know what, guys? There is this vertical orientation. I believe firmly that God wants to be in a relationship with you, and God will do anything in the world to let you know how much he loves you and he wants to be in a relationship with you. And our church is founded on this basic idea. But it's not just that. There's more. And you have a responsibility, and I have a responsibility, not just for yourself, but you have a responsibility for others. Your purpose, your calling, your meaning. It's not just about you. It's about something bigger. You have a bigger responsibility. And he says, we have a responsibility to one another, to others, right? And you can't do that alone. You can't do that in isolation. You can't do that as a solo Christian. He says, we're to help one another love better. We're to help one another do good things, to serve, to help, to impact our community, to serve our city. We're to spur one another, encourage one another. And sometimes that's a gentle encouragement. Sometimes that's an arm around the shoulders. And sometimes it's a good kick in the behind, right? We're to encourage one another, to stir up one another, to do good, to love. And then the next one, verse 25, he says, and don't give up meeting together. Don't give up gathering together, as some are in the habit of doing. He says, don't stop. You need each other. You can't do this alone. You can't do it in isolation or solo. Don't stop. Instead, that's a transition word. Instead of giving up, instead of stopping, what does he say? Let us encourage one another with words of hope. Let us do this even more as we see the day of Jesus' return approaching. He says, encourage one another, spur one another, stir one another, be hope givers. Like we need this. You know, a few weeks back, we did a series called My Big Fat Mouth, which I probably need to listen to that again. But we did this thing called Ben Big Fat Mouth. In part 4 of that, we talked about the idea that we, through our words, are either destroyers or builders, right? That every day, there's no neutral words. Your words are either building people up or destroying people. And what he's saying here is, hey, together, right, we're to be builded up through our words, through our actions. We're to build others up, to offer, he uses the word hope. Right? We need this idea of Sundays, right? Life is hard and you're going through all this and you're at work and school and you got family issues and all that. And there's something that happens when we gather together. He says there's this hope that happens. Don't give up meeting together. This is why the research and the data on this is just so overwhelming, right? I mean, not even faith-based data. The research and the data on this is that if you isolate, if you live alone, it will like crush you physically, mentally, and emotionally. I mean, it's why, because of the rising sense of loneliness, it's why there's such a rise in anxiety and depression and stress-related things. This is why people who are followers of Jesus who try to do it on their own, who try to isolate and just, you know, I'm good, I got my Bible and my podcast and my whatever. That's why I've never met someone who's solo Christian that actually made it. They've always ended up losing their faith. They've always ended up in the ditch somewhere. This is why, because he says, you can't do it on your own. You weren't created this way. There's a divinely designed correlation between community and faithfulness. It's a divine design between community doing life together and those who actually make it. Right? It's not how you start, it's how you end. This is how we were created. This is our divine design. Faith comes alive in community. Faith comes alive when we are together. You know, here's the thing about this solo following Jesus, this solo Christianity idea, is it's in some ways it's easy. You know why? Because I like me. Me and me get along really well. We have similar personalities, right? We have similar likes and dislikes. Like, we agree a lot. Me and me, when I look in the mirror, I'm like, dude, great idea. Love that idea. Love that. It's brilliant. But where do you grow? Like, where do you learn? Like, where do you learn patience? Where do you learn about forgiveness? Where do you learn about peace and hospitality? Right? Like, me and me, we're just over here. We're good. But where do you grow? You grow when you're around other people. Right? You grow when people are around you tick you off. Right? And instead of choosing anger or lashing out, you choose grace. Right? You grow around people who aren't like you, and you have to like stop for a minute and put yourself and go, hey, I want to understand you. I want to understand your position because we don't agree here. We're different here. I want to understand you, right? That's how you grow, right? That's how you learn patience. That's how you learn grace. That's how you learn empathy, right? You grow when you're around other people. See, me and me, we're good. I can do this all day. We're always in agreement. We get along pretty well. We actually like the same things, you know. But me and you, oh man, you tick me off. You do dumb stuff. You call me and I got to come pull you out of the ditch, right? That's where I grow, right? Same thing for you. Where do you grow? You grow with your family. You grow with people around you. You grow with your friends, right? Here's the reality. When we isolate ourselves from each other, we inevitably isolate ourselves from God. If you choose isolation, if you choose to do life alone, you will not only isolate yourself from others, you will isolate yourself from God. But here's the great news, is God gave us a solution. And we talked about this last week in part 1 of All In. We talked about this idea of church. And church is not what you think it is. It's not a building. It's not a time on Sunday. Church is people. And that we have this greater mission and purpose, and you can dial into that. But there's a deeper part to that. It's not just about the church. It's about us together, community. And again, we've tried from day one here at Miami Church. We're not perfect. We're deeply flawed. We don't have this all figured out. But we've tried from day one just to kind of simply go back to the teachings of Jesus, to the teaching of the New Testament. Like, what does it look just to simply follow Jesus? And one of the things that's so clear is that we have to do life together. We have to. We cannot isolate. We can't do life alone. Life is too hard. It's not the way to Jesus. It's not the way of following Jesus. And we've used this imagery, or at least it's been the imagery in my head. It's this idea of kind of locking arms, right? And you can just imagine a bunch of people, and if you put your arms together in locked arms, and like, you know what? I can do life solo. I can kind of go and do my thing. And in some ways, it's easier. But real life, real following Jesus, like real community, real together, is locking arms with people. And guess what? Sometimes these people are going to tick me off. And sometimes these people are going to be hard. And there's going to be times when third guy down over there is going to drag us down because he's in a hard time. And there's going to be times when third person over this way goes off somewhere. And you're like, what are you even doing? Hello, come back to the real world, right? But the reality is we're locking arms together, right? And it's not just for your sake, because this is good for you. This is the way that you don't just mentally, physically, emotionally, like, destroy yourself. But it's also together. It's good for everybody. And so we've created this thing we call neighborhood teams. And neighborhood teams is simply this idea. You saw it on the back of that card. Neighborhood teams is simply this team of Jesus followers, right? Not perfect people, totally people that are flawed and messed up. It's teams of Jesus followers who live in some proximity to each other, and they choose to lock arms with other people who live in their area. They choose to, and they choose to in order to activate their faith. Right? I choose to be part of a neighborhood team because I know to truly follow Jesus, to truly live out my faith every day, not just Sunday. You can look really cool in here on a Sunday morning, but to live my faith out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, right? To live out my faith, I'm going to need other people. But then if we take seriously what the author of Hebrews says, it's not just about me, right? Living my faith, activating my faith. That's a part of it. That's vertical. There's also this sense that I have a responsibility to help activate your faith. I have a responsibility to come alongside and encourage you and to stir you up and to spur you on, to challenge you sometimes, right? And together, we can experience the fullness that there is, right? This idea of purpose and calling and meaning in life. That's simply the goal of a neighborhood team, right? Is to come together to lock arms. We say it this way, the neighborhood team is where you will be challenged to act on what you believe, right? To put legs to it. I mean, I can sit here all day like, oh yeah, man, God loves you and Jesus and grace and hope and blah, 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 right? But where does the rubber meet the road, right? In life. Like, where does real grace happen, and real patience and real love and real joy, right? It happens in life. So the goal of these neighborhood teams is teams of people, right? Who gather together and they lock arms together and activate their faith and live their faith, and they help each other and encourage each other. And it has enormous benefits for you personally. It has enormous benefits for your mental and physical and spiritual health, your emotional health. It has enormous benefits for that. It helps you reach your dreams. It helps you live your purpose. But even deeper than that, it has an enormous benefit on our city. Because we started this church a few years ago with this simple idea, like, what would it look like to have teams of people all over Miami-Dade, like hundreds of these things, all over Miami-Dade, like people doing life together, living their faith, making the city a better place. Like, what would happen? And the idea in 30 years from now, right, if we could all look back and say we threw a map up there and there was all these dots all over Miami-Dade, like, what would happen in our city? Would our city be better off? And I think it would. I think we could literally turn the city upside down. And so my heart today is for those of you who are lonely, who are similar to that family that I talked about. Like, you look good, right? All of you look good. I could go on your Instagram. It looks good. It's hot. It's great. It's on point. But do people really know you? Like, who do you call? Like, do people really know your heart and your longing? I'm not talking about your mama, I know, but who? Who knows your heart, your longings, your desires? It makes me sad. I want you to not do life alone. Some of you out there, you're trying to solo this thing, right? You got it all figured out. That's good. I hear you. But man, you can't. You can go down that track for a while. It's not going to work. Right? We were created by community, for community, to be in community, and we need each other. And my hope, desire today is that you will take a step toward that. And I'm going to give you some practical application on that in a few minutes. But right now, I want to just pray over you. Can I just pray over you?
Thanks so much for watching today. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email at hello@miamichurch.com. Also, make sure to subscribe here on our YouTube channel. And if you believe in what God is doing here at Miami Church and you want to support, go to our website and click the big pink Give button at the top right corner. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.